Warwick claims to be the finest medieval castle in England, but there's more to see here than displays of armour, old furniture and portraits of previous owners. Former private apartments have been brought alive with waxwork tableaux. The year is 1898 and the Earl of Warwick is playing weekend host. Clara Butt, the finest singer of the day, is here to entertain his distinguished guests. Virtually everything on show was in use at the time. Old photographs have allowed missing items to be duplicated. It's all part of a growing trend to make history live, to provide visitors with a greater appreciation of a building's past than they'd get from a mere recital of names and dates. All over Britain, castles and stately homes are using imaginative methods to interest and entertain their visitors. They're reinforcing that enterprise with a better range of souvenirs and gifts, smarter cafeterias and restaurants, all designed to provide visitors with more for their money. Critics may argue that places like Warwick are about history, not entertainment, but the proof is in the figures. In 1987, the castle had more visitors than in any year since it opened its portcullis to the public. Over 642,000 came to inspect Earl Guy's giant porridge pot, to hear the tales behind the treasures, to gaze at Oliver Cromwell's helmet. There's been a queue outside the Jorvik Centre in Coppergate, York, ever since it opened in 1984 to entertain as well as educate. Children can mint their own copy of a Viking coin, one of only 2 discovered anywhere in the world. At Beamish Museum in County Durham, history is all our yesterdays. It's yet another of the country's new breed of museums, where the staff are part of the exhibition, on hand to answer all your questions. At Beamish, you get a taste of life 60 to 100 years ago. Sometimes it's literally a taste. Anyone for stotty cake?
I'll start at this end of the row, OK? You're working your way along.
Beamish aims to show what used to be the everyday life of ordinary people in the northeast. Its success won it the European Museum of the Year award last year. A century ago, this was one of the most prosperous regions in Britain. Much of its wealth came from the coal that fired the Industrial Revolution. So, appropriately, the tram's first stop on the Beamish tour is at the Drift Mine. Here, ex-miner Bob Whipps has a new job, telling visitors how coal was extracted.
Picking shovel, there's tools, a couple of candles for lighting, and we call that hand hewing. Now, that's how mining first began.
An old farm is part of the museum. Inside the farmhouse, you can sit around the kitchen range and hear how the farmer's wife would have spent her day. In another part of the 260-acre site, a country station and signal box have been reassembled and equipped to look as they would have done in 1910. The last stop on the Beamish tram route is the recreation of a street in the 1920s. The dentist's house comes complete with a nervous patient in the waiting room. The surgery upstairs is authentic enough to make your teeth ache. Across the road from the Sun Inn is that other mainstay of village communities, the Co-op.
So we would put 2 of these receipts from the triplicate into the ball with the money, seal it up and send it to the cash office, like this.
As elsewhere, the assistant explains the customs in this shop and what everything was used for. Do you remember when change rattled overhead? Do you remember Liberty bodices and button boots and buying a slip for 6 and 6pence farthing? Do you remember is the constant question at Beamish. Next door is the grocer's part of the Co-op. Here you're back to when biscuits were sold loose, flour was guaranteed not to contain plaster of Paris, and every half year the Co-op paid out a dividend on what you'd spent. Remember the divvy?
It's quite full, and when we turn the handle,
365,000 people visited Beamish last year. Here, as elsewhere in Britain, the irony is that nostalgia seems to have a great future.